Hello everybody, and welcome to the small studio. And today we're shooting a small bottle which is just there on this acrylic glass sheet, and we're going to be filling the glass sheet with some water in a minute because I want to use some ripples. Let me just come around here a little bit. Let's see if this Osmo will track me. There we go. So I've been messing around with projecting things onto these screens, which hopefully you can see on the other camera. And I've been using a projector for that, which means that I can effectively design my own light, gradients, you know, whatever you want really, backgrounds, pictures, anything. So just a digital cinema projector. However, I want to freeze some ripples today, and so because projectors are quite dim, you have to use quite long exposures to get the light that you need out of those bulbs. So we're going to use flash today. So what I've got, so if you follow me over here, hopefully this thing will track me, and then we'll use the other camera. And around here, what we have is two flash heads. So they're both Lenkata Superfast 600s, and they are projecting onto this screen here. So I've got an orange gel in one for a nice rich colour, but I didn't want the product. I mean, if you gel a light and you've only got that one light in the scene, then it's pretty pointless because you've just got a uniform colour over the entire thing. You could do that in post. So what I've done is added a white spot into the middle of that projection there, which is coming from the lower of those two lights. They're both roughly pointing at the same place. The highlight is a little bit lower on the screen. Now what that means in terms of the position in the shot is that it's going to be so let me get this right. It's a bit of a mind bender this sometimes. So the things that are lower on the screen, right, are going to be higher up the shot, right, when it's reflected. So the higher up that I want the result to be, if we have a quick look at the back of the camera there, you can see the hotspot is roughly, I want it on the top and the shoulders of the bottle and roughly around the bottom of the bottle there. And so it's a question of moving those lights around until they appear in the right place. And I can do all this setup without the water. It's just easier that way, right? Because these things are never completely watertight. I've made a little dam out of gaffer tape and blue tack. And in a minute I'm going to fill that with water so that we can then generate some ripples. The other thing we've got in place here that you'll notice, this bit of white card, and if I wasn't so lazy I'd go and get a fresh bit without a hole in it, but it does the job. And what that is doing is providing a nice, I can't quite see it on there, let's have a look through the back of the camera again. It is providing a nice little white stripe only on the cap. So bizarrely that only really, let me just recenter this, that only really affects the cap. Which is quite lucky actually. If it had caused other unwanted side effects, all I'd have done was taken that as a separate frame and just pasted it in where I wanted in post. So, you know, you can get around these things with the magic of Photoshop and taking more than one shot. In terms of the camera, what we've got here is a D850, you can see the trigger on there, and we've got the 70-200 f4 on here. Now, the 70-200 f4 does have quite a close focusing capability, but it isn't that close, right? So I have got actually on here 10mm of extension tube to bring the focus range in close enough so that I can focus that close on the bottle. I like this lens because it's very sharp. It's I think it's Nikon's second sharpest f-mount lens. Certainly the sharpest zoom I think that they did. Will be surpassed obviously by the Z lenses in time, if not already. But it is a good choice for in the studio for this sort of work. But if you need it to focus closer, then extension tubes are the answer. And these are not expensive, and they don't need to be expensive because there's nothing in them really in terms of glass. There's no optics. They literally are just spacers. But I've got a set of, let me just get the box here. You can have a look at this. We have these Meek three-piece extension set. Now these do have the advantage of carrying through the electrical connections, so the autofocus, auto aperture, and all the rest of that stuff still works. You know, vibration reduction if you need it, and all that kind of stuff. So let's put that back there. So I've taken the test shots now, and I'm happy with the light position. I've spent a lot of time sort of moving the lights up and down on the screen, changing the angle of the screen as well, which creates a sort of global adjustment. You can see there that it's at a sort of an angle there. I've more or less got the lights square onto the screen so that the projections on the screen are circular, but because the screen is at an angle versus the projection, they are elliptical. So they're slightly stretched top and back, top to bottom. Which is something that I want for this shot. If I didn't want that, I would need to tabletop the screen and put the lights more above, right, so that they would be shining directly down, and therefore we would get a more circular projection, which of course would then drift into an ellipse horizontally because of the angle of the camera, right? So there's a number of angles here at play that you've got to take into account for the result that you want. But lots of things that you can adjust to get that. And you know, one of the great things about this sort of work, and also the curse of this sort of work, is that you can play endlessly with all of these different variables to get completely different shots. And the kind of the anxiety is that you haven't quite got the best one yet. Right? So, you know, you feel the need to continually play, but eventually you've got to move on and create something. But of course, if you were doing this for a client, you'd want to give them the best possible result that was in the setup or in the idea, in the concept. So we're going to fill this with water right now. I don't think there's anything really left to explain. I am going to be using a remote to shoot this because I'm going to have to make some ripples, so I'm going to be over that side. And I'm just going to stab the water. Oh yes, one of the things we need to talk about is that, of course, square bottles like this do not generate attractive ripples. If it was a round bottle, I might just drop the bottle from about a couple of millimeters height, and that would make sure that the ripples emanated from the center of the bottle. However, I know that if we do this with this rectangular section bottle, that it'll generate strange interference patterns. It's a thing, you know, you might like it, but personally I don't. So what I'm going to do is just tap the water with the blunt end of a pencil to create ripples in front of it or in the back of it. I may also experiment with just dropping little drops of water in there as well to create extra little splashes. But that's a dangerous game. Once you get into that, you do risk covering the subject with splashes. With that in mind, one of the tools that we're going to be using for this is this air can. Right. These are useful for a number of things. Obviously for cleaning dust off things is the usual use, but also for cleaning water drops off the subject without touching it. I've got a pair of white gloves that I'll wear to polish it in a minute. Now I've finished with the setup, so I'll give it a clean before I put it in its final place. I've marked the position, X and Y, with these pieces of blue tack. Those are the smaller pieces that you can see on the outside of the tape, because obviously that surface on the inside will not be visible when I fill it with water. The only other thing about filling these things with water is that the bottle will be underwater, and what I might do is just put something under the bottle just to raise it up by 3 or 4 mil, because I'm not generating the ripples with the bottle. So as long as the water touches the bottom of the bottle, I'm all right, but I don't really want the bottles to be submerged in the water. That will look a bit naff, I think. Anyway, I'm going to get on with the rest of the setup, and you'll join me when that's done. Let's give you a little tour of the setup so far. So we'll come back to the other camera. Here we go. You can see through the hole there. So now, it doesn't look a lot different, but it is now, this tray is now filled with water. You can see that the water reaches right to the back, but the surface tension holds it in place. It's slightly higher at the back, just to stop it running off. I do have a tray on the floor which has captured a couple of drips, but it will stay there quite nicely. And of course, the advantage of water is, or one of the advantages of using water as a surface is it's always flat. It's self-leveling. It reflects really nicely. And so you don't actually need this black acrylic underneath if you don't have that. Because of the angle of the light, right? So if we just pull back and you can see the angle of the lens and the angle of the light. Now imagine an axis of the lens coming down there, hits the water, and it will reflect off it at the same angle. So you don't see any of the light, you don't see anything beneath the surface of the water. Even these little pieces of acrylic that I have the bottle standing on, you can't see that from the camera angle because all of the light is coming from behind, so they don't show up, which is quite nice, quite handy for me. I mean, you can see them from this angle. Just get that to focus properly. There we go. But from the camera angle, if we drop down, there is a bit of ambient light in the room. Of course, it's not the same light as the camera's getting exactly, because there's a window behind. So you can see them slightly, but with just the flash shot, obviously you don't see them at all. So this is the basis for a lot of product shots, by the way, is just what you're doing is generating an environment that's going to reflect off the subject. You're not really lighting the subject, you're just projecting the kind of the scene that you want onto the back of this, and it has to be a nice simple scene. In this case, just a couple of lights, or really just bound together as one light, which gives us this projection on here, and that's many stops more light when the flash goes off than the rest of the ambient, so the rest of the lights don't have any effect. We're just getting this reflection off the card as well, but that's only really affecting the cap, the gold cap, which is inside that plastic surround at the top. This is not an expensive bottle actually, of perfume. It belongs to my daughter. She's never used it, she doesn't like it, but it's actually quite elegant and quite nice. I did try another bottle earlier, which I'll show you here. This one is too complex. Okay, so I think we've finished this session. I've ended up with a couple of gels in the lights, so we've kind of gone for a bit of a role reversal. So we went for some gels in the end, and so we've got a wash of blue, from this Fresnel head, and I've switched to the Fresnel because I needed more power. The snoop with the grid was just cutting out too much light. So we're still at power 10 on this, and that one is 8.5 I think. So we've got some orange and blue even, which is always a good mix, and that is giving us a really nice gradient. Now I've had to put lots of gaffer tape on this Fresnel head to block up these holes because they were projecting on there. You can see the ones at the top there, but they're not a problem because they're out of shot. But these were generating some nasty little highlights in the background. The rest is the same, and we've just been experimenting dropping stuff into the scene with this syringe. Just dropping some drops in. I tried one drop, lots of drops, fast drops, slow drops, taking the picture at different times so you get kind of different bits of the impact of the drops in the water, so you can make a hole in the water, and you get traditional sort of those water splash things that people get with the little crowns and things like that. Not particularly what I want for this, but it's all good. Always good to sort of experiment and change things. So that's where we've ended up, and I think I like these the best. So hopefully you're looking at some of those now on the screen, and I think that nice little gradient with the splashes has worked out really nicely. So onto the post, and we'll select a couple of these to retouch. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and we're going to develop one of the images from the bottle shoot. Now I've already done one, which is this one here, and we can see the final result here. That loads, there we go. So that's after Photoshop and Lightroom treatment. Work in Photoshop, as we'll see, is just basically cleanup. There's not a lot really to do. It's just fixing a couple of minor things and just cleaning up dust and stuff like that. So what I've done is I've applied the settings that I've made to this from a colour point of view and tone and crop and that kind of stuff in Lightroom to another image which I'm going to develop, which is this one. So this is what it looks like out of camera. As you can see, we've got a bit of spare space at the top there, which I don't really need. And so I could extend it and replace it and drag this up, or use content aware fill to fill that. But in this case, this crop about there is going to be fine. So what I'll do is when we synchronize it, you can see what's changed, but obviously we can't see what I've actually done on there. So we'll go back to this one, which is where the settings were actually done, and we'll go back to the beginning. So the first thing was the crop, and then we've applied the usual lens related stuff, which is I've turned on remove chromatic aberration. This draws upon a database which Adobe maintains of all the different lenses that Lightroom knows about. So it automatically applies the correct chromatic aberration settings for that lens. Likewise, the lens profile, but you won't notice a lot of change there. So if I take that off and then put it back on, this is the Nikon 70-200 f4, which has really low deformation in terms of the image, so that when you apply the corrections you don't see a lot of change really. I wouldn't pay too much attention to these numbers. I had a 10mm extension tube added to this to get it this close, so don't be fooled into thinking that it was really that far away. It was probably about 18 inches away from this bottle. It was quite close really, and we added the extension tube to enable the lens to focus that close. I actually quite like the minor vignette that the lens applies, or sort of incorporates into its image. So I've dialed off to 0 the vignette correction, which is also built into the database of lenses. We've rotated the image ever so slightly, and then constrained the crop, but as you can see, it's not quite horizontal at the top, and that's a mistake that I've made with angling the camera and or the bottle, and we can't really create it or correct it, sorry, as a global thing here in Lightroom. So what I'm going to have to get a little bit more creative with the free transform tools in Photoshop to do that. So we've ignored that for the time being in Lightroom. Then setting the black points and the white points. So I've taken the black point down, the white point up a little bit, because I actually do want this bit to be blown out. Okay, this is part of the look that I'm going for. I just want this nice uniform rectangle or quadrilateral at any rate shape on the top, and likewise on the shoulders a little bit there. It's actually only blowing out just slightly in there. If we turn that off, you can just see it's just inside the cap there, and that's fine. I want that. We've given the vibrance a bit of a boost, the tint, and then changed my mind about various things, but we've ended up here. Now, in a fit of strange sort of spot removal-y type things, I decided to remove some spots and do some corrections in Lightroom, which I don't normally do. It's a lot easier to do this. I think I was just clicking, just fixing things in Lightroom, but we're not going to use those. So what we will do is we'll go back to this image now, synchronize settings, we'll go into the spot removal tool, and we're going to turn those off. Because those weren't actually spots on the sensor or the lens or anything, they're actually in the image. They're the bits of dust and things like that, and obviously they're not there or in the same place in this image, so it doesn't make sense to clone those across, so we're going to turn those off. Right, so that's it really for Lightroom. I might mess with the colour a little bit later, but we're going to preserve most of the colour information anyway, almost all of it, as a 16-bit TIFF in Photoshop. So we're just going to go ahead and edit this now. So we're just going to edit in Photoshop 2021. Talk amongst yourselves for a bit while that starts up. I should build a new PC at some point to make all this a bit quicker. This is a 3rd gen i7 from about 5 or 6 years ago. 24 gig of RAM, 4 gig video RAM, and a 1 terabyte SSD with all the software on it. And there we go. Right, so let the cleanup commence. So there's not a lot to do here really, but the first thing we are going to fix is that alignment. So we're just going to just unlock the background. Actually, we'll just make a copy. It's easier. And we'll launch into free transform. And I think last time I used the skew tool, but I think it kind of pulled about the rest of the image maybe a little bit too much. So I'm going to try with the warp tool and just grab the corner there. And I think that's maybe all that it really needs. I might then just get the skew tool. Maybe no, maybe not. I think that's maybe a bit of a bridge too far there, isn't it? Let's go back to the warp tool and just see if there's just a piece of if I can just tuck that across just slightly. Now we'll just apply that and then we'll flick it on and off and see whether I've made it better or just cocked it up royally. So we can flick that on and off, and I think that is better, right? I think we can agree that that is now standing up quite nicely. Is it too much perhaps? I'm not sure. I think it's okay. Alright, so let's carry on with this, and we're now going to look around the image for some obvious blemishes, and already we can see there's a water drop on there. So I'm going to get rid of that. Now I'm using the spot healing brush for this, not the regular healing brush, but the content aware healing brush, and I've got it set to quite a a hard brush, right, I've found that this just gives better results. It's less confused if you give it a sharp edge to work with, and it's just a question of just dabbing over those problem areas. And it's a bit like doing a selection and then doing a content-aware fill of that selection. It's just quicker. Now this bottle does have a sort of a texture to it, and quite a lot of sort of these little sort of indents, which increase as a sort of a frosting as you go further on down. So it's there's not much point in trying to remove it, because it's just a texture. But these little bits of droplets of water, I found that one looks a bit naff though, doesn't it? Let's try and do that a bit better. There we go. Now some of these may not work out with the content aware tool. It's just a question of trying the different methods of removing these kind of things, and we can but mostly this is going to be pretty successful, as you can see there. And we mustn't forget to do the reflection. Now on this one the reflection is being disturbed by the ripples, unlike the previous shot which had the ripples at the back and it didn't disturb the reflection at all. So we've again just got to be a little bit careful. Always give content aware some context to play with. It's a mistake to try and get too close in and try and just cover the thing that you're trying to remove. You need to let it eat into the surroundings a little bit, so that it, especially where there are edges concerned. So that might have been, so you've got to experiment with the size of the brush a little bit. And then once you get going, you can get up to speed and whiz around this pretty quickly. And we're going to do a bit of a global adjustment on this as well in a minute. As a dust and scratches layer, but for the time being, some of these bubbles here, although they look like there's a lot of things here, but you can whiz around these pretty quickly once you get up to speed with your brush. So I'm using a Wacom tablet. It's a really old, really cheap one. It's the smallest one they did at the time, and I bought it from John Lewis of all places. And it's a Wacom A5 Bamboo. It's the best one I've used. I've tried bigger ones. I much prefer this little one. There's just less movement. I don't have to move my entire arm across the desk. Okay, that's most of the prominent ones off that side. There's a few more up here. Another look round there. You can see that only took, it took less than a minute really to do that really large bunch of dots there. Let's continue looking. I need to clean my screen. I don't know how many times I've been tempted to or tried to clone off stuff which is actually on the monitor. There's quite a lot of bubbles in here. These do build up under the surface once your water's been sitting for a while. The air in the water starts to coalesce into bubbles, which is a bit of a pain. You can clean them off, disturb them with a brush. I use a little paintbrush sometimes under the water and just give the surface a bit of a swish around and disturb all the bubbles and get them to rise to the surface, but I didn't in this case. So there's quite a few of them, but as I say, we'll get rid of these in short order. The rest will be done by the content aware, the dust and scratches layer, which we're going to do in a minute. So a quick look down here. There's another one there. Now these things, you know, you can't really control completely how these ripples behave, but so it's really happy to get this little additional droplet splash there, which has fallen off the end of my syringe or the pencil. I forget which I was using at the time. A few more here. Oh, excuse me. And let's have a little check further up, and then we'll get on to the bottle itself. Right, so I want that little thing in the middle. Now, I made the mistake here, classic schoolboy error, of using a clip to hold my reflector. Big red clip, which wasn't terribly clever. I should have supported that from above, really, which would have been out of the shot. So there's, it appears in a few places. But again, we're going to give Photoshop a few little clues as to, I mean, we might do a bit of manual cloning there, I think, just to improve that a little bit. So let's get the clone tool, and we'll just fix that little bit there. There we go. Back to the spot healing brush, and have another look around. Now, none of these practice bottles that I use are new, so they will have little blemishes on them as well. So I'm going to just have a quick scan for any that are really, really prominent, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you're going to do this for real, you know, if you were doing this for a client from the manufacturer, you'd have like 10 bottles to use for this, and you know, you're going to pick the best one and they'd be pristine out of the box. So just have another quick check up and down here. We're probably going to correct this, but I'm going to use a different technique for that. We're going to lift off the texture and just spread the tones out a bit in a minute. Using frequency separation, which is just a fancy way for saying we're going to lift off the texture, fiddle with the tones and the colours underneath, and then put it back. The rest of this is kind of like, you know, all these little imperfections here, they're all over the bottle. So there's no point really trying to take out too many of them. Just anything that's really prominent, little bright spots, we'll deal with. And just have a look in this plastic cap. There's a little bit of a thing there. And of course, a lot of it is internal reflection and refraction, which we don't want to destroy. But things that are kind of like that, that's obviously just a, you know, a bit of dust or something. There's a little particle there. Just have a scan up and down these straight lines to make sure there's no kinks or things that are going across like that there, that. That. So you can quickly just dab up and down here for most of this. Let's just work this a little bit to match the other side. That's a bit better. So I'm holding the spacebar, by the way, to flip the image around, just to move it around. And I've got super scroll turned on, which means even if I make the image small, it will still scroll, which is very useful. I'll have a look around the texture at the back, but I think that's mainly okay. That's looking very clean, in fact. Do I see a little dust spot there somewhere? Did I just imagine that? I must have imagined it, or it's on the monitor. Oh, there it is. So look, there's an actual dust spot there. Gone. There might be a few others knocking about, but this sensor on this camera is fairly clean. That's a bit odd there. Photoshop does behave very oddly sometimes. What on earth is going on there? I'll just use another tool. It just becomes determined that you're going to have that little artifact in your image, and it just moves it about. Sometimes if edges are missing, there's going to be corresponding problems at the other corners, so worth checking. I think we're okay. I did just spot that this corner is a little bit lighter than it should be as well, so I think we're going to tackle that in a slightly different way. And we're just going to do a quick content aware fill in the corner. There we go. That's dealt with that. Okay. So back to full size, full screen, and we're now going to. I think we'll just merge that down. I don't keep all the layers. It drives everyone nuts, but I'm not really interested in doing that and having a huge layer stack, you know, with folders and names and all kinds of stuff. As soon as I've finished with the bit, I'll commit it. But I like to start each thing on a new layer, just in case I monumentally cock it up and I want to start again. Right, so we're going to do a dust and scratches layer, which I think is going to take care of some of the lower level stuff down there. So this is under noise. Now I've already got this set up, no threshold and a radius of about 10. And if we do that, and then we'll flick that on and off, and you can see, hopefully, you won't be able to see too much effect on the ripples. Just on the bottle, which obviously we don't want it on the bottle. So I think that's good. Now we're looking at the ripples and it's not ruining the definition, which is good, right? Apart from maybe on this bit here. So we're going to put a reveal all mask on it, get a black brush, and we're going to put that to 100% opacity and flow. So that's 0 and shift 0 to set those via the keyboard. And first of all, I'm just going to roughly outline the bottle. Okay, and then make that bigger. Just go over that. And then a neat little trick is you can then just switch to the mask there and just go over any bits that you missed. There we go, don't want any of that dust and scratches on there. And we probably don't want it over these nicely defined ripples either. Just make sure we've got the edge of that in. And we'll probably just go over the edge of this thing. Let's zoom in a little bit and just see what, if any, sort of texture it's destroying down here. And then, which I think we're good. So it's kind of out of focus anyway. Then we can click this on and off again just to see and look around for any remaining bubbles that were down here. And I seem to have done a reasonable job of cleaning almost all of those up anyway. So just look for anything that's left and then flick this on and off. And yeah, you can see there's a little speck there, so it's definitely dealing with things of that size. Let's go to the other side. See if there's any, so there's some crud around there. Yeah, that's definitely dealing with that, which is nice. Now we get up to my mask. Let's try taking put that back in there. Now the other thing about dust and scratches is of course it does introduce a bit of banding, like any sort of smoothing technique. So we take that on and off, you can see there's a little bit of banding in there. So what I'm going to do to combat that is make sure that I'm on the layer and not the mask. In fact, I'm going to unlink the mask just to make sure that the effect only applies to the actual layer. And I'm going to just put a tiny bit of noise back into the layer. Now this will differ depending on your camera, and for this image I found on this D850 about 0.5% of monochromatic Gaussian noise neatly deals with that banding, so we can just apply that. Now all the banding is gone, and the noise level then matches up with the natural noise from the sensor where we haven't applied the dust and scratches, if that makes sense. So that you don't suddenly get like a block colour bit where you fixed it of perfect no noise area. You'll only notice that when you zoom in, but it's annoying. Sometimes, I've forgotten to do it and only realised when I've zoomed in later and gone, oh. Right, I mean, that's pretty much it as far as the cleanup goes. So I'm going to combine those. Now I'm going to do a bit of edge sharpness, just using high pass filter. So I'm going to apply this at 3%, maybe a little bit too much. There's a bit of haloing there actually. I'll undo that. Let's try 2. So let's go high pass 2, 1, yeah, 1 I think. 1.2. It will get a little bit less. There we go. Let's set that to overlay. And again, we can toggle it on and off. It's very subtle. It's just a little bit. It's just sharpened it up just a little bit. And just make sure that it's not having any daft effects elsewhere. I think that's spot on. Okay, merge that down. That's all I really need to do on this. It's pretty boring in terms of retouch, I'm afraid, but there it is. But getting these things consistent is important, which is why I'll always do the adjustments from one image, and as soon as I've edited one of those images in Photoshop, I'm kind of locked into that initial treatment in Lightroom. So from then on, I will always just synchronize what I've done before, and if I need to do more color corrections later, I'll do them back in Lightroom. So it kind of gets like double processed in Lightroom. For the more creative stuff, I'll do back in Lightroom. I can do some of that stuff in Photoshop, but it's just more intuitive messing with sliders in Lightroom, for me anyway. So there we have it. So we'll save this. So it's already, make sure that it says background again and it's locked. So that means if it doesn't say that, then just do layer, flatten image. Because sometimes you can have it just one layer but it still isn't flattened. So it saves the layer structure inside and the size of the file balloons. But down here we can see we've got a very reasonable 226 meg for a 16-bit TIFF, which is not bad. I'm using zip compression as well, which takes a little bit longer to save, but is worth the extra compression that we get. Bearing in mind the raw file is compressed raw, lossless compressed raw is only about 50 meg, something like that. Okay, right, so if we go back to Lightroom, oh, there was something I've forgotten. We didn't deal with this. Okay, so as promised, we're going to set up a frequency separation layer. I'm not going to go into the maths behind frequency separation. There's plenty of tutorials online that will tell you through how to make that. I've just got an action recorded to do it. But essentially it's splitting the texture on the high frequency layer and the broad colour and tone onto the low frequency layer, and it's the low frequency layer that we're going to mess with today, and almost always it's only the low frequency that I ever change. So what we're going to do with this is you can see that there's a few little, there's kind of impurities in the shape of the glass, and the bit of perspex that I made as a stand that this is actually sitting on is probably refracting and reflecting bits of light all over the place. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the mixer brush, with no paint on it. Okay, so it's only going to mix the paint that's already in the image, the colours that are already there. So it's set to, so we can ignore that because there's no paint on it. Everything's set to 30 apart from flow, which is at 10%. And it's a soft brush, and essentially what I'm going to do is just use this to just kind of like even out this little line across here. You can see that I need to make the brush bigger to as I go further up, just to avoid making horizontal lines, and then we can just push it, smear it over the colour. There we go. Get in there in that little strip as well, make that a little bit more uniform. And just even that out a little bit. There we go. You can see that's evened that out quite nicely. Now I want to make sure that I've absolutely preserved the edges, so I'm just going to get a very small, and I'm going to use the mouse for this and shift click it. So I'm going to start there. Let's make sure I'm on black, that would help. I'm going to click once there and then shift click at the other end. It's a little bit too high, that one, so do it a bit lower. There we go. It's going to bring back some of those imperfections, but I don't want to smear the... oh, that's too much. I think I just prefer it blurred. It is frosted. It's behind frosted glass, so it kind of looks alright. The other edges are exactly the same. And then if we zoom out, always check your work at different zoom levels, just to make sure that you're not messing up the overall shape and balance of the image. And I quite like that. There's another little bit down there on the right which I think could use a bit more work. So we'll go back to the mixer brush onto the low frequency layer, just mix that in there. And I think that might be under the mask. Yeah. So let's just get the white brush on the mask and just remove it just from there. And go back to here, mixer brush. Oh. I think I've done a bit of a hack job on there, haven't I, with the let's just blend that in. There we go. So blend the mask in a little bit more. Back here, mixer brush. Just make sure that's nicely blended in. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. There's a bit more work. Let's go back to that. There we go. Okay. And that's that fixed. So as I said, layer, flatten image, and jobs are good 'un. Okay. One other thing I might try actually, just while we're here, is just try just doing a bit of a highlight boost, and this is a method that I use just to isolate the highlights, just to apply the image to itself on the multiply blend mode as a merged layer, all three channels at 100%. So it's effectively like duplicating the layer and then setting the top one to multiply, right? But it's all done on one layer, and then the layer then you can set with its own blend mode of screen. So effectively what we've done is we've taken, if we look at before we set that to screen, you can see that it is effectively only selected the highlights, so it's going to bias the highlights, and then if we set that to screen, it's going to make those brighter. Then we can toggle that on and off. Obviously it's way too much. We might dial it down to something like about 23. Just gives it a little boost. Now, even you could do this for the curves. I think perhaps 16%, maybe a little bit lower. Yeah, 15%. There we go. I like that. We'll keep that. Right, save that. And then the rest of the colour work we'll do in Lightroom. So that's saved. Off we go. Back into Lightroom. Now, it doesn't always reflect immediately. So we'll just to make sure, we'll click off it. So there's before Photoshop, there's after Photoshop, and then that should come good. Now, I applied some changes to the other TIFF file that I did, so you'll watch those kick in just there. So if I apply the same changes to this, so we'll sync those. We don't want the crop removal, we don't want any transform, we don't want any local adjustments or anything like that. If we apply that to that, you can see it's done a few things. So what's happened there is I boosted the shadows, lowered the blacks, which is effectively just pulled apart the very lowest tones and spread those out a little bit. That appears to be it, unless I did any colour changes. We can check in there, there's nothing in there. Did I do anything in the colour grading panel? No. So that's all good. I hardly ever use the tone curve in Lightroom. So it looks like just those basic tweaks. And we'll see whether that kind of matches up. Okay. That's not bad at all. So I think we could play around with white balance and things like that. Maybe introduce a bit more magenta into it. This is where you can get really artistic. There's no right or wrong with this, unless there's some specific colours within the product that you need to retain. But I think perhaps a little touch of magenta on there, and maybe just a slight warming up. It's pretty cool. We'll see how it responds to saturation as well. Yeah, not convinced. Let's try just vibrance, which is a bit more selective on the colours that it extends. Yeah, I think maybe a +5 on the vibrance. And I think that's it. So we're just going to export this. Control Shift and E. I have to look at the keyboard there because I just know where the fingers go, but I just thought, which buttons do you actually press to do this when you've got to say what it is? So here we are. We've got, oh, that's for BTS, we don't want that. So I'll go to my, no, not that, I'm going to do we're going to do wallpaper, which is kind of full screen. And we'll choose that folder, and the rest of it is pretty standard. It's going to do it at sort of HD resolution, which is what my screen is, so it'll fill the screen. We'll export it. Talk amongst yourselves, and there it is alongside the other one. Let's get rid of the toolbar in Earth and View there. Or we can put it full screen like that. I'll move out of the way, and that's it. So hopefully you found this video useful. So that's a shot from start to finish. You've seen the setup in the studio, you've seen the lighting, you've seen the practical problems that we had to overcome in terms of how to build the sort of the water dam with the gaffer tape, which didn't leak at all. actually, although I told you on the video that they always leak, this one didn't. I did block up the corners with some blue tack as well where the tape overlapped, because it has a tendency to make a little sort of pyramid and the water sneaks in underneath, but it didn't. It all held up. So anyway, without further ado, I'll leave you to get on with your day, and look out for some more videos sometime soon.